The first time I saw Thomas open his eyes that morning, I sensed a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite explain. After decades of working these halls, you learn to feel the weight of a secret before anyone says a word. The hospital was just waking up, sunlight barely filtering through the blinds, and the usual chorus of beeping monitors and distant voices seemed muffled, as if the whole building was holding its breath. I was making my rounds, checking on the night's patients, when I saw them, Thomas's wife, Shirley, and their daughter, Carol, waiting for me near the nurses' station. Their faces were pale, eyes swollen from crying, hands twisted together so tightly I thought they might never let go. They stopped me before I could even reach for Thomas's chart. Shirley's voice was barely above a whisper, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. "Please," she said, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "Please don't tell him anything. He doesn't need to know. Not yet." Carol nodded, her lips trembling, as if she was holding back a flood of words and tears. I looked at them both, saw the fear and love tangled together in their faces, and I felt the old ache in my chest, the ache that comes from knowing you're about to carry someone else's pain. I didn't make any promises. After so many years, I know better than to promise things I can't control. But I nodded, and in that moment, I became the keeper of their secret, whether I wanted to or not. I carried it with me as I walked into Thomas's room, feeling the weight settle on my shoulders like a heavy winter coat. He looked up at me with those clear blue eyes, the same eyes I'd seen shining with laughter just weeks before, and smiled. "Morning, Virginia," he said, his voice thin but warm. I smiled back, trying to keep my own voice steady, and began my usual routine, checking his vitals, fluffing his pillow, asking about his pain. But all the while, I could feel the secret pulsing in the room, filling the space between us. The day moved slowly, each hour stretching out longer than the last. I watched as Shirley and Carol hovered nearby, never quite meeting Thomas's gaze, their words careful and measured. I saw the way Thomas looked at them, confusion flickering across his face when they grew quiet or turned away. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him that whatever was happening, he wasn't alone. But I kept my silence, honoring the plea they'd made in the hallway. As the hours passed, I found myself thinking about all the secrets I've carried over the years. The things families ask us to hide, the truths we're told to keep from those we care for. Sometimes it's out of love, sometimes out of fear, and sometimes because the truth feels too heavy to bear. But this secret, it felt different. It pressed on my heart, made it hard to breathe, as if I was the one being kept in the dark. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hospital lights flickered on, I sat by Thomas's bedside, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. I thought about the promise I hadn't made, about the trust Shirley and Carol had placed in me, and about the man lying in front of me, unaware of the storm swirling around him. I wondered what I would do if it were my own family, if I would want to know, or if I would want to be protected from the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would learn next. When the truth finally came to light, it hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room, leaving me gasping, struggling to find my footing. My name is Virginia, and after a lifetime of holding hands through pain and loss, I thought I had seen everything. But some secrets, no matter how many years you've lived or how many tears you've wiped away, still have the power to shake your soul to its core. That morning, the hospital seemed quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves could sense the secret being held inside room 307. I'd been on the day shift for years now, but each dawn still carried its own flavor of exhaustion and hope. Some days, the halls buzzed with the gentle optimism of recovery. Other days, like this one, the air was thick with things left unsaid. I could smell coffee brewing from the nurses' lounge and hear the distant squeak of a janitor's cart, but my mind stayed with Thomas and the heaviness his family had placed on my heart. I remember pausing by the window in the hallway, letting the sunlight warm my hands for a moment before continuing my rounds. The hospital was a patchwork of humanity, patients in various stages of healing or decline, families shuffling in and out of rooms, nurses and doctors weaving between them like silent threads pulling everything together. I always tried to greet each patient with the same gentle smile, but that day my mind kept drifting back to Thomas's room. Thomas had been with us for over a week, and in that short time, he'd become a favorite among the staff. He was a retired history teacher, the kind of man who could make you believe in the goodness of people just by the way he spoke. He loved to tell stories about his old students, especially the troublemakers who turned into fine adults. He teased the younger nurses, calling them kiddo, and always thanked us, even when we had to prick his finger for the 5th time in a shift. It was impossible not to feel something for him. That morning, as I entered his room, I noticed little details. The crossword puzzle book on his bedside table, a faded photograph of him and Shirley at Coney Island, the scent of lavender from the lotion his daughter had brought him. He was sitting up, propped against his pillows, looking out the window. When he saw me, his face lit up with that familiar warmth. I could see he was tired, though, more so than usual. There was a new kind of shadow in his eyes, a quiet worry he tried to hide. I checked his vitals and tried to make small talk, but my heart wasn't in it. Shirley and Carol were in the room, fussing over his blanket, asking if he wanted more water. There was a nervousness in their movements, a carefulness in every word. I watched as Thomas searched their faces for reassurance, and I wished I could have given it to him myself. But the secret sat between us, heavy and unspoken. Other nurses came and went, bringing medications and fresh linens, but I lingered by Thomas's side longer than usual. I suppose I was trying to offer some comfort, even if I couldn't explain why. I remembered all the times, over the years, when I'd watched families gather around a loved one, sometimes to celebrate, sometimes to say goodbye. I knew what it was to be the silent witness to their moments of heartbreak and hope. Later that morning, during a rare quiet moment at the nurses' station, I found myself reflecting on my own life. I thought about my husband, gone these many years now, and how I had once held my own secrets, trying to shield him from pain. I understood in a way what Shirley and Carol were doing. Love makes you do impossible things. It makes you carry burdens you never thought you could bear. Yet, even with all that understanding, the weight of their secret was becoming my own. By noon, the hospital had come alive again, the pace quickening as doctors made their rounds and families filled the waiting areas. But for me, time seemed to slow around Thomas's room. Every time I glanced inside, I saw the same tableau. Thomas searching for answers, Shirley and Carol holding each other up, all of us caught in the quiet storm of something unspeakable. And in the back of my mind, I wondered how long any of us could bear it, and what would happen when the truth finally broke through. Sometimes, in these long corridors, you realize that the hardest part of nursing isn't the medicine or the procedures. It's carrying the stories, the hopes, and the fears of those who trust you with their lives. That morning, I felt the full weight of that trust, and I knew that whatever happened next, it would stay with me for the rest of my days. There are mornings in a hospital when the sunlight tries its best to soften the sharpness of the night before, but some shadows cling to you no matter how bright it gets. That day, I felt those shadows with every step I took. The floors gleamed under my sensible shoes. The air had that familiar mix of antiseptic and brewing coffee, and the world outside those windows was already moving on, while inside, time felt suspended. I moved through my morning routine, checking charts, sharing smiles, and offering gentle words to those who needed them. Yet my thoughts were drawn again and again to room 307, where Thomas lay surrounded by love and silence in equal measure. I would see Shirley and Carol huddled together in the hallway, talking in hushed voices, their bodies pressed close as if trying to hold each other up. When they entered Thomas's room, they wore brave faces, their voices gentle, never betraying the storm I could see swirling just beneath the surface. There was a careful choreography to their care, a hand on his shoulder, a soft brush of his hair, a glance exchanged between mother and daughter that held 1,000 unspoken words. I've seen that kind of love before, the kind that aches to protect but knows it cannot shield forever. Thomas himself was a man whose kindness filled up a room. Even as illness claimed his strength, he remained generous with his gratitude, always asking after the nurses' families, remembering small details about our lives as if they mattered to him as much as his own. He had a way of making you feel seen. I remember him telling me once about a student who had struggled, about how sometimes all a person needed was for someone to believe in them just once. That stayed with me as much as any lesson from a textbook or a training seminar ever could. But on this morning, I saw the questions lurking in his eyes. He looked to Shirley and Carol for answers, but they offered only smiles and reassurances that everything was fine. I ached for him. I ached for them. My hands, so used to comforting, felt clumsy. There was nothing I could do to make this easier, not for any of us. I checked his blood pressure, listened to his heart, wrote my notes in careful script, all the while feeling like I was intruding on a moment I could never fully understand. As the hours went by, I tried to lose myself in my duties, helping Mrs. Ruth down the hallway for her daily walk, comforting little Nora as she woke from a bad dream, finding a moment to share a laugh with Ronald in the break room. But always I circled back to Thomas's room, drawn by a sense that something was about to shift. The other nurses noticed my distraction. They've seen it before, in themselves, in each other. We all carry the weight of the lives entrusted to us, and some days that weight presses a little harder. Later, when the lunch trays had come and gone, and the afternoon lull settled over the floor, I found myself alone at the nurses' station. I sat with my tea, watching the patterns of sunlight move across the linoleum, and let my mind wander back over the years. I thought about the secrets I'd kept, the promises I'd made and broken, the times I'd tried to protect someone from a painful truth. I remembered the day my own husband fell ill, how I had tried to keep the worst of it from him for as long as I could, thinking that somehow my silence would make it easier for him to bear. It hadn't, not really, but I understood, deep in my bones, why Shirley and Carol had asked what they did. I caught myself wishing for someone to talk to, someone who could lighten the burden with me, but I knew this was a part of the job that couldn't be shared. It's a strange kind of loneliness, being at the center of so many lives, knowing so many secrets, and yet not being able to unburden yourself to anyone but your own heart. I wondered, as I watched the world outside move along, if anyone listening to my story now has ever felt that same ache, the ache of loving someone so much that you'd rather carry their pain than let them feel it, even for a moment. If you have, I hope you'll tell me where you're listening from, and maybe share a piece of your own journey so we can remember that none of us are truly alone in this world. It was late in the afternoon when the air in the ward shifted, as if a storm had rolled in and settled quietly around us. Sometimes, after so many years in these halls, you sense when change is coming, an instinct born from 1,000 days and nights spent waiting for the next moment to test your heart. That day, the feeling was so strong it nearly stopped me in my tracks. I was at the far end of the corridor, watching as the sunlight faded into gray, when I heard the hurried footsteps and the low voices that always signal something is wrong. A code was called 2 rooms down from Thomas, and the staff rushed like a well-rehearsed dance, but my mind was with Thomas and his family. I finished my duties as quickly as I could, my hands moving from memory, but my heart was already racing. I returned to his door just in time to see the doctor step out, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed with the look I've come to know too well. Shirley and Carol were inside, Shirley clutching Thomas's hands so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Carol standing at the foot of the bed, trembling. The doctor caught my eye, and in that brief glance, I saw the storm had finally broken. I entered the room quietly, as I always do, not wanting to intrude, but knowing I needed to be there. Thomas looked up at me, his face pale, the lines around his mouth deeper than ever. He tried to smile, but it faltered. I could see the questions in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, even if no one had said a word. The doctor spoke softly, his words careful but heavy. I watched as Shirley's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Carol stared at the floor. The truth was coming. I could feel it. I stood by Thomas's side, my hand resting gently on his arm, offering the only comfort I could. In that moment, I felt the full weight of my promise to his family, the burden of their secret pressing on my chest. Thomas looked at me, his voice thin and afraid, and asked if he was dying. My heart clenched. I wanted to tell him everything would be all right, that he just needed rest, that the doctors would find a way. But I couldn't, not after what I'd promised. Instead, I squeezed his hand, hoping he could feel all the love I couldn't put into words. That night, as the ward grew quiet, I sat by his bed long after my shift had ended. The monitors hummed softly, and outside the window, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. I watched Shirley and Carol drift in and out of uneasy sleep, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. Thomas drifted in and out too, waking to ask questions we could not answer. I felt helpless. I've seen pain before, grief and fear and anger, but this was different. This was the ache of not knowing, the agony of secrets held too long. It was then, in that quiet, when the doctor returned and asked to speak with me in the hallway. He told me what he had told the family. Thomas's condition had worsened. The cancer had spread farther than any of us had hoped. There was little more we could do except make him comfortable and let his loved one say goodbye. The words settled in my chest like stones. I nodded, thanked him, and tried to steady myself before returning to the room. I looked at Thomas, and I wished, more than anything, that I could offer him the truth or even a small measure of peace. But I respected Shirley and Carol's wishes, even as the secret became almost too much to bear. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the rain, and wondered if I was doing the right thing. I remembered all the times over the years when I'd been the bearer of hard news, and how sometimes the truth is the greatest kindness we can offer. But this time, I was left holding silence, and it felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. In that moment, I realized how fragile we are, all of us, how we reach for control, for hope, for the chance to protect the ones we love from pain. But sometimes, no matter what we do, the truth comes in like a storm, and all we can do is stand beside those who are hurting and let them lean on our strength. That night, I held Thomas's hand, Shirley asleep in the chair beside him, Carol curled up at his feet, and I prayed for the wisdom to know when secrets become too much to bear, even for the strongest of hearts. That night, sleep was a stranger to me. I sat in the dim hospital corridor, the low hum of machines and the distant shuffle of footsteps, the only sounds keeping me company as the hours crawled by. The rain outside tapped a steady rhythm against the glass, and I found myself watching the droplets trace their paths, feeling the heaviness of what I was carrying settle deeper into my bones. Inside Thomas's room, Shirley and Carol hovered in a restless vigil, Shirley's hand never leaving her husband's. Carol curled in the corner chair, her face pale and drawn. I busied myself with the little things, adjusting his blanket, checking his IV, smoothing his hair, anything to avoid the silence that pressed in on us all. But nothing could distract me from the look in Thomas's eyes, the searching, the pleading, as if he knew something was being kept from him. As the hours passed, Thomas grew more restless. He asked the same questions, his voice thin and uncertain. Would he get better? Would he be home for his grandson's birthday? Could he see his garden again? I answered with gentle lies, my heart breaking a little more each time. Shirley flinched at every word she couldn't say, and Carol wiped away tears, turning her face to the window. I have carried many burdens in my years as a nurse, but that night, the weight of this secret threatened to break me. By morning, Thomas's breathing had grown shallow, his skin cool to the touch. The doctor was called, and I watched as Carol stepped out to call her brother, her hands shaking. The family gathered, the way they do when the end is near, but no one dares to say it. I offered what comfort I could, a warm blanket, a soft word, tissues for tears that wouldn't stop. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my own heart ached with all the things I wished I could say. The tension in the room was thick. Shirley and Carol exchanged worried glances, their guilt and love tangled together. I saw them wrestle with the decision they'd made, wondering if they should have told Thomas the truth, if he deserved the chance to say goodbye in his own way. I wished I could ease their pain, but there are no easy answers, no perfect way to protect someone from heartbreak. I've seen families torn apart by secrets, and I know that sometimes silence can be as heavy as the truth itself. Thomas drifted in and out of sleep, his hand cold in mine. I whispered small blessings, words meant to comfort, though I knew their power was limited. Shirley's tears fell freely now, and Carol sobbed quietly, her head bowed. The room was filled with sorrow and love, so raw it seemed to vibrate in the air. Standing at the edge of their pain, I felt every moment, every regret, every unspoken word. I thought of all the families I've cared for, all the secrets I've carried, and how helplessness is sometimes the hardest part of this work. If you've ever held a secret or a sorrow too big for words, know you are not alone. If this story has touched you, I invite you to share your own, or simply stay with me as we walk through these long nights together. Sometimes sharing the burden is all we can do. The next hours moved with a kind of heaviness only those who have waited at a bedside truly know. I sat in the dim, humming corridor, the rain outside streaking the windows, and a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside Thomas's room, Shirley and Carol kept their silent vigil. Shirley's hand never straying from Thomas's. Carol perched in that corner chair, her face shadowed and drawn. I tried to make myself useful, adjusting the blankets, checking the IV, smoothing gentle hands through his thinning hair, anything to fill the silence that pressed on all of us. But nothing could keep me from seeing the confusion in Thomas's eyes, the searching, the flicker of realization that something important was being held back. I watched him grow restless, asking the same tender questions in a voice that was growing more fragile with each passing hour. Would he be home for his grandson's birthday? Would he see the garden again this spring? I answered with soft reassurances, never quite telling the truth, and every word felt like another stone placed on my chest. Shirley would flinch at the gaps in my answers, and Carol would turn to the window, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. I have carried many burdens as a nurse, but that night, this secret felt almost too great to bear. When morning light crept through the blinds, Thomas's breathing had grown shallow and his skin cool beneath my fingers. I called for the doctor, watched as Carol stepped into the hallway to call her brother, her hands trembling. The family gathered quietly, moving as if through water, their eyes red and swollen. I moved among them, offering warm blankets, tissues, a gentle squeeze of the hand, small comforts in the face of such sorrow. My own heart ached with all the words I could not say. The tension in the room was thick, guilt and love tangled together in every quiet glance between Shirley and Carol. I saw them wrestle with their choice, wondering if perhaps Thomas deserved the truth, if he should have had the chance to say goodbye on his own terms. I wished I could give them certainty or peace, but I knew from a lifetime of experience that there are no easy answers when it comes to protecting someone you love from pain. I have seen families torn apart by secrets, and I know now that silence can sometimes weigh just as much as the truth itself. Thomas drifted in and out of sleep, his hand cold in mine. I whispered small blessings, the kind meant to comfort, though their power felt very small. Shirley's tears flowed freely. Carol's sobs were quiet and shaking. The air was thick with sorrow and love, so raw it made my heart ache. Standing on the edge of their heartbreak, I felt every regret and every word that went unsaid pressing on my soul. I thought of the families I've cared for, the secrets I've carried, and how helplessness is sometimes the hardest part of this work. I remembered my own nights spent holding hands in the dark, wishing I could take away the pain, and realizing that sometimes all we can do is witness and love. I looked at Shirley and Carol, saw the exhaustion and devotion etched into their faces, and I knew they would carry this night with them for the rest of their lives. I wanted to tell them that love is never wasted, even when it hurts, and that sometimes the simple act of being present is the greatest gift we can offer. If you, listening now, have ever carried a secret or sorrow too heavy for words, know you are not alone. If my story has touched you, I hope you'll share your own or simply stay with me through these long nights. Sometimes sharing the burden, even in silence, is all we can do, and sometimes that is enough to keep us going until the morning comes. The next hours moved with a kind of heaviness only those who have waited at a bedside truly know. I sat in the dim, humming corridor, the rain outside streaking the windows, and a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside Thomas's room, Shirley and Carol kept their silent vigil. Shirley's hand never straying from Thomas's. Carol perched in that corner chair, her face shadowed and drawn. I tried to make myself useful, adjusting the blankets, checking the IV, smoothing gentle hands through his thinning hair, anything to fill the silence that pressed on all of us. But nothing could keep me from seeing the confusion in Thomas's eyes, the searching, the flicker of realization that something important was being held back. I watched him grow restless, asking the same tender questions in a voice that was growing more fragile with each passing hour. Would he be home for his grandson's birthday? Would he see the garden again this spring? I answered with soft reassurances, never quite telling the truth, and every word felt like another stone placed on my chest. Shirley would flinch at the gaps in my answers, and Carol would turn to the window, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. I have carried many burdens as a nurse, but that night, this secret felt almost too great to bear. When morning light crept through the blinds, Thomas's breathing had grown shallow and his skin cool beneath my fingers. I called for the doctor, watched as Carol stepped into the hallway to call her brother, her hands trembling. The family gathered quietly, moving as if through water, their eyes red and swollen. I moved among them, offering warm blankets, tissues, a gentle squeeze of the hand, small comforts in the face of such sorrow. My own heart ached with all the words I could not say. The tension in the room was thick, guilt and love tangled together in every quiet glance between Shirley and Carol. I saw them wrestle with their choice, wondering if perhaps Thomas deserved the truth, if he should have had the chance to say goodbye on his own terms. I wished I could give them certainty or peace, but I knew from a lifetime of experience that there are no easy answers when it comes to protecting someone you love from pain. I have seen families torn apart by secrets, and I know now that silence can sometimes weigh just as much as the truth itself. Thomas drifted in and out of sleep, his hand cold in mine. I whispered small blessings, the kind meant to comfort, though their power felt very small. Shirley's tears flowed freely. Carol's sobs were quiet and shaking. The air was thick with sorrow and love, so raw it made my heart ache. Standing on the edge of their heartbreak, I felt every regret and every word that went unsaid pressing on my soul. I thought of the families I've cared for, the secrets I've carried, and how helplessness is sometimes the hardest part of this work. I remembered my own nights spent holding hands in the dark, wishing I could take away the pain, and realizing that sometimes all we can do is witness and love. I looked at Shirley and Carol, saw the exhaustion and devotion etched into their faces, and I knew they would carry this night with them for the rest of their lives. I wanted to tell them that love is never wasted, even when it hurts, and that sometimes the simple act of being present is the greatest gift we can offer. As the rain eased and the first pale light of dawn crept over the city, I found a strange sense of peace washing through the room. The storm of the night had left us raw, yes, but also softened, and I saw in Shirley's tired smile and Carol's gentle touch a kind of grace that only comes after you have given everything you have. I lingered a little longer, holding Thomas's hand, feeling the quiet strength that comes from simply being there. If you, listening now, have ever carried a secret or sorrow too heavy for words, know you are not alone. If my story has touched you, I hope you'll share your own, or simply stay with me through these long nights. Sometimes sharing the burden, even in silence, is all we can do, and sometimes that is enough to keep us going until the morning comes. When the last hours of that long night finally broke into dawn, I felt the air in Thomas's room shift. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city washed clean, but inside, the weight of what we'd all endured lingered like a gentle ache. Shirley still sat by her husband's side, her fingers intertwined with his. Carol, exhausted, leaned against the window, her eyes red, but somehow steadier than before. The silence in the room was not the hush of secrets anymore, but the quiet that follows after you've given everything you have to love and to loss. Thomas's breaths had grown slower, each one softer than the last, and I knew it would not be long now. I stayed with them, holding Thomas's hand, whispering to him about the things he loved, his garden, the laughter of his grandchildren, the warmth of summer sun. I watched as Shirley pressed her lips to his forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I witnessed Carol take her father's other hand, finally speaking the words she'd been holding back. How proud she was, how much she loved him, how grateful she was for his gentleness. There was a trembling in her voice, but also a strength, as if the act of saying those words out loud stitched something back together inside her. As the morning light spilled across the bed, I realized in that moment that sometimes the greatest act of love is not protecting someone from pain, but standing with them inside it. Secrets can be a shield, but they can also become a wall, separating us when we most need to be together. I do not judge Shirley and Carol for their choice. Love makes us do impossible things. But as Thomas faded, I saw the peace that came to his features, the relief that washed over the room as the truth, spoken or not, was finally allowed to settle. There was a softness in the air, a sense that even in sorrow, something had been healed. After Thomas's passing, there were tears and embraces, the soft words of comfort that fill the halls after loss. I stayed with Shirley and Carol, helping them gather his things, listening as they remembered the man he was, the father, husband, teacher, and friend. The morning light spilled through the window, and I felt a calmness settle in my own heart, the kind that comes from knowing you have done all you could, even when you couldn't do everything you wished. I watched as Shirley and Carol leaned on each other, their grief mingling with laughter as they recalled old stories, and I was reminded again of how love endures even after goodbye. I have learned through decades of nursing that grief and love are woven together, and that the stories we carry are what make us human. Sometimes we are asked to hold secrets. Sometimes we are asked to let them go. But always we are called to bear witness to suffering, to hope, to the fragile beauty of goodbye. If you are listening and have ever faced a moment when your heart was torn between protecting and telling, know that you are seen. We all carry burdens, and sometimes the only thing that eases them is knowing that someone else understands. If you have ever sat in the quiet after loss, wondering if you did the right thing, I hope you find comfort in knowing that the answer is rarely simple and that grace can be found even in the hardest choices. So I leave you with this. Cherish the moments you have, speak your love when you are able, and do not fear the silence that comes after loss. In that silence, there is room to heal, to remember, and to begin again. Thank you for letting me share this piece of my journey. And if you feel moved, share your own story or simply hold this one close. Sometimes that is enough to carry us through until the next sunrise, and to remind us that, even in the quiet, we are never truly alone.